Welcome to Sleeping with Science. It is lovely to have you here. Before we begin, I want you to know that this story has been created with a gentle purpose, to help you rest. If sleep comes quickly, then let it take you. And if it takes a little while longer, that is also perfectly fine. In the meantime, you will be traveling with me through one of the most remarkable stories ever told, the story of where we come from. Even if your eyes close and the words turn soft in your mind, the journey continues, flowing gently like a quiet river. Before we start, I would like to invite you, if you enjoy these calm explorations, to like this video and subscribe to Sleeping with Science, so that we may keep creating new journeys that carry you into both knowledge and rest. When we ask ourselves where Homo Sapiens come from, we are not asking a small question. We are asking a question that stretches across time itself, across billions of years of Earth's history, and across the delicate branches of evolution that led to us. It is a question both scientific and deeply human. To wonder where we come from is to place ourselves within a larger story, one that began long before memory, long before language, long before even the first living cell divided. Earth itself is older than we can easily imagine, more than 4.5 billion years old. For most of that time, no human eyes existed to look upon it. Oceans rose and continents shifted, mountains formed and were worn away again. Volcanoes sent ash into the air, and rivers carved valleys into stone. This restless planet spun silently in the darkness of space, carrying the ingredients of life long before life appeared. It is humbling to remember that the Earth has its own vast biography, and that humanity enters only in the very last chapters. And yet, here we are, asking the question of our origin, and by doing so we reveal something remarkable. We are the part of the universe that has become aware of itself. We are stardust that has gathered into flesh and bone, into minds that can wonder, and into voices that can tell stories. To know where we come from is not only a scientific curiosity, it is also a form of comfort, a way to see ourselves connected to everything that came before. As you listen, you may imagine the countless steps that brought us here, cells forming in ancient oceans, creatures walking on strange shores, primates climbing trees, and humans shaping fire in the night. Each step belongs to us in some way. Each is part of the long, winding trail that ends, for now, in your own breathing as you rest tonight. This first chapter is not about facts alone, but about opening the door. It is an invitation to follow a path that leads through the ages, from chemistry to biology, from forests to fire, from silence to speech. As we move through this story, remember that you do not need to hold every detail. You may drift, you may float, you may even sleep. The story will continue gently, carrying you forward like a calm tide. And so, our journey begins. The Earth before us was not the quiet blue and green world we know today, but a place of fire, storms, and endless change. More than 4 billion years ago, it was young and restless, a molten sphere still cooling from its violent birth. The surface boiled with lava, and asteroids rained down from space, striking with such force that entire oceans of rock melted again and again. Over time, this chaos began to soften. The outer crust hardened, rains poured for millions of years, and the first seas collected in vast basins. Those waters shimmered beneath skies thick with gas and dust, skies with no oxygen to breathe, but skies that promised the possibility of life. As you listen, picture this early Earth, not as a barren wasteland, but as a canvas in motion. Continents drifted like rafts on a sea of molten rock, colliding and breaking apart in slow, powerful dances. Volcanoes rose like open wounds on the surface, spilling minerals into the oceans. Lightning split the skies, striking those seas again and again, stirring chemistry into complexity. The Earth was not yet alive, but it was preparing a stage where life could one day enter. There is something calming in imagining time at this scale. Our daily concerns, our hurried clocks, seem to vanish when we remember that billions of years passed before even the simplest living thing came to be. The planet itself teaches patience, reminding us that change is not always sudden, and that growth often happens quietly in the background. Just as sleep drifts upon us slowly, so too did Earth drift from a fiery beginning into a world that could cradle life. The scientific story of this early Earth is pieced together from rocks older than imagination, from isotopes that tell tales of ancient atmospheres, from crystals that formed in the planet's first waters. These clues are fragile but powerful, whispers from a time when there were no eyes to witness, no minds to remember. We read them today as if they were a book written in stone, one that holds the earliest chapters of our own existence. And yet, there is also poetry in this ancient scene. To imagine oceans forming under endless rain is to imagine renewal, as if the planet itself was being washed clean to begin again. To imagine lightning striking seas heavy with minerals is to imagine sparks of possibility, tiny flickers that may one day give rise to life. We do not stand apart from this story, we emerge from it, shaped by the patience of the earth and the chemistry of its storms. As you breathe softly now, you may feel a little of that vast patience yourself. Just as the earth carried on for eons before humanity, so too does the night carry you toward rest in its own time. There is no need to rush. The planet did not hurry in becoming ready for life, and you do not need to hurry into sleep. It will come when it comes, as natural and as certain as the rising of the next day. And so, from this restless young earth, the stage is set. In the chapters to come, life itself will step onto this stage, delicate and unlikely, yet determined to endure. From the quiet chemistry of oceans, the first sparks of biology will appear, and the long journey toward us will begin. The young oceans did not think or plan, yet they hosted experiments beyond counting. Warm shallows rose and fell with tides, shorelines dried and flooded, minerals leached from fresh rock, and lightning stitched brightness across heavy skies. In that busy chemistry, small carbon chains began to appear, some linked into rings, some tangled into longer strands, some broke apart as quickly as they formed. Most arrangements vanished back into the water, but a few lingered, finding shapes that could hold for a moment longer than chance. One idea scientists explore is the world of vents on the seafloor, where alkaline fluids met colder ocean water and created natural pores in chimney-like structures. Inside those tiny chambers, steep energy gradients ran like batteries, offering a steady push that could power reactions. Another idea points to shallow pools at the surface, where cycles of wetting and drying concentrated ingredients the way a cook reduces a sauce. There are also proposals that dust and ice from space delivered helpful molecules early on, a kind of starter kit scattered by meteorites. Different paths, same destination, increasing order inside a restless sea. Molecules do not live, but some behave in ways that hint at life. Certain strands can act as templates, helping new strands form with a similar pattern. Others fold into stable shapes that nudge reactions along, like tiny tools that fit a single task. Lipid molecules gather into spheres by simple physics, making bubbles with watery insides and watery outsides, yet a thin barrier between. Put the right strands inside the right bubbles, and a protocell appears, not a cell as we know it, but a compartment where useful reactions stay close together instead of drifting apart. Energy is the quiet requirement in all of this. Without a steady source, complexity collapses. Vents supply chemical gradients, sunlight supplies photons, minerals like iron and sulfur pass electrons along, and clays on ancient shores offer surfaces where fragile chains can cling long enough to grow. Chance still dominates, but the landscape is biased, and in a biased landscape, patterns have a better shot at surviving the next wave, the next spark, the next change in temperature. There is a puzzle about information. Life today stores instructions in DNA and runs many tasks with proteins, but early on, a single type of molecule may have done both jobs. Researchers call this the RNA world, because certain RNA strands can both carry code and catalyze reactions. If such strands formed in those early settings, they could copy themselves imperfectly, making families of variants that competed for ingredients and energy. Most lines would end quickly. A few would stumble into better stability or faster copying and hold on a little longer. From that slow filtering, novelty accumulates. Another puzzle is handedness. Many biological molecules come in mirror image forms, yet living systems prefer one hand. That asymmetry hints at a moment when randomness tipped and stayed tipped, perhaps under polarized light, perhaps on crystal surfaces that favored one orientation. Details remain debated, but the result is everywhere in modern cells. When we look for evidence, the rocks speak softly. Ancient zircons record early water, certain isotopes suggest early metabolisms, and very old layered structures point to microbial communities not long after the crust cooled enough to keep seas in place. The record is incomplete, as if pages were burned and rewritten by heat and pressure, yet the remaining lines imply that once chemistry found a foothold, it kept advancing. Picture it now as an alphabet assembling before grammar existed. Letters collected into syllables, syllables into short words, and once a few words could copy themselves, longer sentences became possible. No author guided the process, selection did. On a planet that supplied energy, surfaces, and cycles, the boundary between geochemistry and life blurred until the difference mattered less than the consequences. By the time this chapter in Earth's history closed, the recipe for persistence had appeared. Compartments held chemistry in place, strands carried instruction, and networks of reactions fed themselves from the surroundings. From that foundation, evolution would find room to invent complexity. In the long quiet ages that followed the first stirrings of life, single cells filled the oceans. For billions of years they were the only living beings on Earth, multiplying, drifting, competing, and adapting. To us they may seem simple, but each cell was a miniature world, with boundaries, energy flows, and delicate balances to keep. Within these microscopic chambers, the chemistry of life became more intricate, until some cells discovered new ways to cooperate, and that cooperation opened the door to complexity. One of the most remarkable transitions was endosymbiosis, a process where one cell came to live inside another. It may have begun as one organism engulfing another, an act of predation, but instead of digestion, a partnership formed. Small bacteria that could use oxygen to release energy became permanent residents inside larger hosts. Over time, they lost their independence, but not their usefulness. And today, their descendants survive as the mitochondria that power nearly every animal and plant cell. Other partnerships gave rise to chloroplasts, which capture sunlight in plants and algae. What once were separate beings became parts of a greater whole, their collaboration a turning point in the history of life. With these innovations, cells grew more elaborate. Membranes folded inward, creating compartments that specialized in storing, processing, or transporting. Networks of proteins acted like scaffolding, giving structure and shape. DNA grew longer, packing more instructions into spirals that could be carefully copied and passed on. These changes set the stage for a new experiment, many cells living together as one organism. At first, these clusters may have been loose, only temporary gatherings. But gradually some cells took on different roles, a few handling energy, others forming structure, still others detecting signals from the environment. This division of labor was the birth of multicellularity. It allowed creatures to grow larger, to sense and move in more complex ways, to interact with their surroundings in forms impossible for single cells alone. Fossils tell us that multicellular life appeared more than 1 billion years ago, at first as simple algae. Later came the strange forms of the Ediacaran seas, soft-bodied organisms with frond-like shapes pressed into ancient sediments. Then, about 540 million years ago, the Cambrian explosion filled the oceans with variety. Trilobites scuttling across the seafloor, worm-like burrowers carving through mud, animals with eyes, spines, and new ways to feed. It was not a sudden magic, but the result of long preparation, an accumulation of small changes that allowed diversity to bloom. The imagery of this chapter is one of weaving. Single cells were like threads, fine and fragile on their own. When braided together, they became stronger, able to form patterns and structures. The fabric of multicellular life began with those braids, and from them, evolution would one day stitch forests, animals, and us. The step from cells to complexity is a reminder that life is not only about competition, it is often about partnership, about joining forces to create something neither could achieve alone. The mitochondria inside your cells are living fossils of that truth. tiny symbionts still at work in every heartbeat and every breath. They link you directly to that ancient moment when cooperation reshaped the world. The oceans grew more crowded and varied as these new beings flourished. Life was ready for its next experiments, new designs tested by the slow patience of evolution. From simplicity, diversity had risen, and from that diversity the story of mammals, primates, and humans would one day follow. When the great age of the dinosaurs came to a sudden end, it was as if a curtain had fallen on one performance and risen on another. 66 million years ago, an asteroid impact ended the dominance of reptiles that had ruled the land, sea, and air for more than 100 million years. In the quiet that followed the devastation, mammals emerged from their hiding places. They had survived by staying small, living in burrows, feeding at night, and caring for their young with milk. In the new world left behind, these strategies became advantages that allowed them to thrive. Mammals spread quickly into the empty ecological spaces. Some grew large and heavy, becoming grazers on new grasslands that stretched across continents. Others took to the seas, their descendants becoming whales and dolphins. In the trees, small, nimble forms evolved into early primates, developing traits that would one day shape our own kind. Each branch of the mammalian family experimented with body plans and lifestyles, filling niches that the vanished dinosaurs had left behind. What set mammals apart was not just their diversity but their adaptability. Warm blood allowed them to stay active in the chill of night or in colder climates. Fur provided insulation against shifting seasons. Most importantly, their care for offspring gave each new generation a better chance at survival. Unlike creatures that left their young to chance, mammals nurtured, taught, and protected. In that ongoing investment, intelligence became increasingly valuable. To remember where food could be found, to learn new behaviors, to cooperate within groups, all these abilities made mammals resilient. The fossil record shows us this unfolding drama in fragments. Teeth that reveal diets, skulls that hint at brain growth, skeletons that suggest running, climbing, or swimming. Some lineages flourished for millions of years before disappearing, like the giant ground sloths of the Americas or the armored glyptodonts. Others gave rise to lineages still alive today. From these survivors we can trace the steps toward primates, and from primates to humans, there is meaning in this story of endurance. We are not a sudden arrival, but the latest branch on a tree that has grown through countless trials. The mammalian way of life, warmth, nurture, adaptability, runs through us still. When you feel the steady rhythm of your own heartbeat, you are carrying the same biological flame that once kept tiny shrew-like creatures alive in the shadows of giants. The age of mammals is often portrayed as a replacement for the age of dinosaurs, but it is more accurate to see it as a continuation of life's resilience. When catastrophe struck, mammals were ready, not by strength or size, but by versatility and care. Their survival gave rise to an explosion of forms, one of which would eventually stand upright and ask where it came from. From the plains, the forests, and the seas of this new earth, the stage was set for the rise of the primates. In their hands, eyes, and social bonds lay the foundation of what it meant to be human, a story we now turn toward. On the open grasslands, where forests gave way to wide horizons, some of our ancestors began to move differently. Instead of traveling on four limbs as their primate relatives did, they rose onto two legs and walked upright. This change was gradual, but it left unmistakable marks on bones, footprints, and the very shape of the body. Walking upright was not a simple adjustment. It was a transformation that altered how we moved, how we saw the world, and how we lived within it. The spine curved into an S shape, balancing the weight of the body above the hips. The pelvis became shorter and broader to support organs and stabilize each step. Legs lengthened, knees angled inward to keep balance, and feet developed arches that could absorb impact and store energy. These changes did not happen overnight, but each adaptation added strength to the new way of moving. Fossils of Australopithecus, like the famous skeleton nicknamed Lucy, show us beings who walked much as we do, though they still carried traces of climbing ancestors. Why walk upright? On the savannas, bipedalism brought advantages. It freed the hands to carry food, to hold tools, to cradle infants. It lifted the eyes higher, offering a wider view of predators, prey, and paths across the land. It made long journeys more efficient, allowing endurance hunts that no other predator could match. These benefits outweighed the difficulties: narrower hips that made childbirth more dangerous, joints placed under new stresses, and spines prone to wear. Evolution is never about perfection, but about survival, and upright walking proved powerful enough to last. The evidence is not only in skeletons but also in tracks. At Laetoli in Tanzania, volcanic ash preserved a trail of footprints made more than 3 million years ago. The impressions reveal a small group walking side by side, upright, their strides steady across soft ground. These tracks are a direct window into a moment of life long gone, yet still alive in our own steps. Walking upright represents more than locomotion. To stand tall is to face the world differently, to see further, to carry oneself with presence. The ability to rise and move on 2 feet gave our ancestors a perspective shared by no other animal of their time. Every step carried not just a body but the potential of a species that would one day explore every continent. Imagine them crossing open plains, the sun behind them, their shadows stretched long, their hands free to carry branches or stone. Each footfall was ordinary in the moment, yet extraordinary in its consequence. They were not yet human as we define it, but their way of moving carried the blueprint of humanity forward. Walking upright was not the end of change, but the beginning of new possibilities. With hands unbound, the shaping of tools would follow. With eyes lifted, the search for fire and shelter would expand. A simple act, to stand and step, became one of the most profound turning points in the story of where we come from. Night once brought deep uncertainty. On the open plains, darkness carried danger, the cries of predators circling unseen, the chill of air that crept in after the sun slipped below the horizon. For our early ancestors, this darkness was not only a boundary but a threat. Then came fire. At first it was borrowed from lightning strikes or volcanic eruptions, a fleeting gift that burned out as quickly as it appeared. In time, though, humans learned to keep embers alive, to feed flames with wood, and eventually to coax sparks into lasting warmth. With that mastery, the night was changed forever. Fire offered safety. The glow of flames pushed back the shadows, keeping sharp-toothed hunters at a distance. Heat kept bodies warm in cold seasons and new territories, expanding the range where humans could live. But perhaps the most transformative gift was cooking. Raw roots softened in the fire, tough meat became easier to chew, nutrients became more accessible. This shift shaped not only the diet but the human body itself, shrinking jaws and freeing energy that fueled growing brains. In the light of flames, biology and culture advanced together. Archaeological evidence of hearths tells us these were deliberate acts, not accidents. Ashes layered in caves, stones cracked and reddened by heat, and charcoal fragments buried deep in the earth speak of repeated, careful use. Fire was no longer an external force, it was a partner. It demanded tending, for it could vanish if neglected, and it demanded respect, for it could consume if uncontrolled. This balance mirrored humanity's own growth. Power gained, but always with responsibility. Beyond its practical uses, fire changed the rhythm of life. Before it, night meant rest and silence. After it, evenings became gatherings. Around flames, people sat together, their faces lit by a shifting glow, their voices rising into story. In those circles, memory and imagination began to weave culture. Tales of hunts, warnings of dangers, and myths about the world found their first stage beside flickering light. Fire became not just a tool but a teacher, shaping how knowledge was passed from one generation to the next. There is poetry in this bond. Flames leap and vanish, yet they leave behind warmth and ash. They consume, yet they illuminate. To sit beside fire is to sit with both fragility and strength, a reminder that life itself is equally delicate and enduring. Sparks climbing into the night may have drawn eyes upward, connecting the glow of campfires with the distant scatter of stars. In that connection, wonder was born. Imagine the stillness of an ancient evening. A small group huddles close, shadows dancing on stone, the crackle of burning wood blending with quiet voices. The fire holds back the night, but it also invites reflection. In its light, humans became more than survivors. They became storytellers, builders of meaning, explorers of possibility. The mastery of fire was a threshold. It transformed diet, safety, and social life. It marked the first clear step where humans shaped nature instead of simply adapting to it. From this firelit circle, the long path of invention stretched forward, and humanity's relationship with the world would never be the same. Long before words were spoken or villages built, our ancestors shaped stone. At first, it may have been accidental. A rock struck against another, splitting into a sharp edge that cut more cleanly than teeth or nails. But soon, intention appeared. Certain stones were chosen, struck in careful ways, chipped again and again until a blade, scraper, or point emerged. These were the first tools, small in size but immense in meaning. They revealed minds that could imagine a result before it existed, and hands that could turn imagination into form. The earliest known tools date back more than 2.5 million years. Simple flakes, sharp-edged and practical, were carried from place to place. With them, humans and their relatives could cut meat from bones, slice through tough hides, or shape wood into handles. Over time, tools grew more complex. The hand axe, symmetrical and elegant, appears again and again in the archaeological record, showing that entire communities knew how to pass down the knowledge of shaping stone. These artifacts were not accidents, but lessons, taught and remembered across generations. Stone tools also reveal something deeper about thought. To make one, a person had to picture the final form inside the raw material. Each strike was guided by foresight, by an understanding of how stone would fracture. This ability, to hold an idea in the mind and bring it into the world, is at the heart of human creativity. A chipped flint is not only a blade, it is a symbol of imagination made visible. The act of tool-making shaped us in return. Striking stone required precision and control, encouraging the growth of dexterous hands and fine motor skills. Using tools allowed access to new foods and resources, fueling survival and brain expansion. Tools became extensions of the body, amplifying strength, reach, and ability. With every stone shaped, the bond between mind and material grew stronger. Archaeologists find these tools scattered across ancient landscapes, lying silent yet eloquent. A flake of obsidian or a chipped piece of quartzite is more than debris, it is the fingerprint of thought, left behind by a being whose name and face are lost, but whose intention remains clear. Each fragment is a message across time. I was here, and I imagined. The symbolism of tools is powerful. They mark the moment when survival was no longer only about what the body could do, but about what the mind could create. Every tool is a bridge between need and invention, between problem and solution. It is a quiet triumph of thought over limitation. Picture, for a moment, a small group seated near a riverbank. One figure holds a stone, striking it carefully, flakes falling to the ground in rhythmic bursts. Another watches, learning the pattern, the rhythm of angles and pressure. Soon the skill will spread, not by instinct but by teaching, an inheritance carried not in genes but in knowledge. This passing of craft is one of the earliest threads of culture. The first tools were simple, but their consequences were profound. From these stones would come spears, bows, plows, and eventually the machines of today. Each invention traces its ancestry to those first sharp flakes. In shaping stone, humans began to shape their own destiny. The story of humanity is not a straight line but a branching tree. For much of our history, Homo sapiens were not alone. Other human-like beings walked the earth, each adapted to their own landscapes, each shaping tools, fire, and culture in ways both similar to and distinct from us. Together, they formed a family of cousins, some close, some distant, all part of the broader human story. Among the best known are the Neanderthals. They lived across Europe and Western Asia, sturdy in build, with broad noses and strong bodies suited for cold climates. Far from the caricature of brutishness once imagined, they crafted complex tools, hunted with skill, buried their dead, and may have sung or painted. They were not so different from us, and genetic evidence shows that many modern humans carry fragments of their DNA, silent reminders of ancient encounters. In the high mountains of Siberia, another cousin left traces in a cave. Known as the Denisovans, they are identified not by complete skeletons but by fragments of bone and tooth. Yet their genetic legacy lives on. Populations in parts of Asia and Oceania still carry Denisovan DNA, evidence of shared lives and interwoven histories. Further back in time, Homo erectus spread widely, walking upright with confidence, crafting tools, and mastering fire. Their fossils stretch from Africa to Asia, a record of endurance that lasted nearly 2 million years. Other branches existed too. Homo floresiensis, tiny humans on an island in Indonesia. Homo naledi, discovered deep in South African caves, with small brains but signs of complex behavior. Each branch speaks of diversity, of experiments in what it meant to be human. To imagine this world is to picture not one species but many, overlapping and interacting. Valleys and plains may have been shared by different kinds of humans, meeting with caution, conflict, or curiosity. Some groups mingled, leaving genetic echoes, others faded, leaving only fossils. In the great sweep of time, Homo sapiens became the last surviving branch, but not because we were the only ones. We are the result of a lineage shaped in dialogue with many others. These cousins remind us that our identity is not built in isolation. Within ourselves are whispers of Neanderthals and Denisovans, not just as curiosities but as real connections, proof that the human story has always been shared. The traits that make us who we are today carry contributions from those who did not endure. When we look at the family tree, it is humbling to realize how crowded it once was, and how fragile survival can be. Each cousin was a world of possibilities, each with intelligence, creativity, and care, yet most disappeared. We are the inheritors of their resilience, and also of their absence. To ask where we come from is to acknowledge them too, for in a way, they walk within us still. With this, the first part of our journey closes. From the birth of earth to the rise of fire, from the shaping of stone to the presence of human cousins, the stage is set. The next part of the story will follow the path of Homo sapiens themselves, tracing how our species was born, how it traveled, and how it began to shape the world in its own image. Around 300,000 years ago in Africa, a new kind of human began to appear. Fossils from places like Jebel Ihud in Morocco show faces, teeth, and skulls that look strikingly familiar. These were the first Homo sapiens, our own species, carrying within them the combination of traits that would define us: lighter skeletons compared to earlier humans, rounded skulls with larger brains, and subtle differences in jaw and brow that together created a distinctly modern form. What made Homo sapiens different was not only anatomy but behavior. Stone tools had been shaped by many human relatives before us, yet in these early sapiens, the tools became more varied, more refined, and more specialized. Flakes were struck with precision, points carefully sharpened, blades thin and efficient. Such skill reflected not just muscle memory but planning, communication, and teaching, a community working together to improve survival. Genetics adds another dimension to this story. By comparing DNA from ancient and modern humans, scientists can trace when our lineage diverged from other hominins. The evidence suggests that our species is part of a long, branching tree, but one that carried forward a unique set of traits that gave us flexibility and resilience. We adapted to different climates, shifted diets, and organized socially in ways that increased our chances of enduring in challenging environments. Life for these early sapiens was still demanding. They hunted game, gathered plants, and faced predators far stronger than themselves. Yet they survived, not by strength alone, but by cooperation. Small groups moved together, shared resources, and looked after the young and the injured. This focus on community distinguished them, making survival a collective effort rather than an individual one. Archaeological sites reveal more than tools and bones. Pigments like red ochre appear, perhaps used for marking skin or objects, suggesting that symbolic thought was already stirring. Such marks do not feed or shelter, yet they reveal an awareness of meaning, of identity, of expression beyond necessity. Even in these early days, the roots of art and culture can be glimpsed. The arrival of Homo sapiens was not a single moment, not a sudden invention, but a gradual emergence shaped by countless generations. It was the result of subtle changes in body, mind, and behavior, accumulating until something recognizably new had appeared. These ancestors did not know they were beginning a chapter that would stretch across the globe, but in their faces and tools, the future was already visible. To look back at them is to look into a mirror that is both familiar and distant. They were us, and yet they were not quite the same, carrying a mixture of ancient heritage and emerging identity. In them we see the spark of curiosity, the strength of community, and the adaptability that would carry humanity into every corner of the earth. The birth of Homo sapiens marks the beginning of a story that is both scientific and deeply personal. From here, the journey turns outward, as our species begins to travel, to encounter new lands and new challenges, and to leave footprints far from the place of our origin. The ability to shape sound into meaning is one of the most profound steps in the story of Homo sapiens. Other animals communicate with calls, gestures, and scents, but human language became something far richer, a system of symbols that could describe not just what is present, but what is absent, what is remembered, and what is imagined. The first words were not written down, and no fossils record them, but their echoes are still with us in every conversation today. The origins of language are difficult to trace, yet clues can be found in anatomy and behavior. Changes in the shape of the vocal tract allowed for a wider range of sounds, from sharp consonants to flowing vowels. The descent of the larynx gave more space for resonance, while the tongue became more agile. Inside the skull, expansions in regions of the brain linked to planning and social awareness provided the capacity to handle complex grammar and meaning. Language was not only possible, it was useful, and natural selection favored those who could share knowledge more effectively. Archaeological evidence offers indirect hints. Hunting strategies that required coordination suggest that early humans could describe plans. The appearance of symbolic objects, engraved stones, beads, pigments, hints at shared meanings passed through words as well as through images. Even the spread of technology across wide areas implies teaching that went beyond imitation, relying on explanation and storytelling. What language offered was memory outside the individual mind. A successful hunt could be described, allowing others to learn without witnessing it. A warning could be given before danger appeared. Myths could be told to explain origins, to strengthen bonds, to pass lessons across generations. With language, knowledge did not vanish with the death of an individual. It could accumulate, shaping culture. The first languages were likely simple, with small vocabularies and limited grammar, but even a few dozen words could transform survival. Over time, these systems grew more complex, able to express not only facts but feelings, not only events but abstractions. With each added layer, the capacity for imagination and cooperation expanded. The symbolism of this step is immense. Language is thought made audible, invisible ideas carried on breath. It is the bridge between minds, allowing one person's vision to become another's memory. Without it, there would be no shared history, no science, no art, no story. The voices of early Homo sapiens, calling across savannas or whispering around fires, began the endless chain that reaches to us now. Imagine for a moment a small group gathered at dusk. One person gestures toward the horizon, shaping sounds that describe an animal's path. Another repeats, adjusting the phrasing, until the meaning is clear to all. In those shared sounds lies trust, strategy, and unity. The hunt of tomorrow has already begun in the words spoken tonight. The emergence of language was not a single invention but an unfolding ability, tested and refined by countless lives. It gave us memory, culture, and imagination woven together in ways no other species achieved. With language, humanity truly began to find its voice. and with that voice, the power to tell its own story. Not long after Homo sapiens appeared, small groups began to leave the landscapes of Africa where they first took shape. The evidence lies in stone tools scattered across deserts, in fossils found far from the cradle of origin, and most clearly in the DNA carried by people today. These migrations were not a single wave, but many, stretching across tens of thousands of years, footsteps echoing through valleys, across coasts, and into new continents. Why leave? Part of the answer is climate. Africa's environments shifted between lush and dry, opening windows of opportunity and then closing them again. When food was scarce, some groups moved outward, following rivers and coastlines. Others may have been driven by curiosity, by the simple pull of what lay beyond the horizon. For a species adapted to cooperation, movement was possible in ways it had never been before. Carrying knowledge, tools, and fire, small bands could survive in new and changing worlds. Genetic studies reveal the paths. One branch moved into the Middle East, from there into Europe and Asia. Others followed coastlines through India towards Southeast Asia and eventually Australia. Later, humans crossed land bridges into the Americas, spreading all the way to the tip of South America. In only a few tens of millennia, a heartbeat in geological time, our species circled nearly the entire globe. These journeys were demanding. Ice ages brought cold and shifting seas. Deserts tested endurance. Mountains posed barriers. Yet in each new place, humans adapted. They hunted animals unfamiliar to their ancestors, learned the uses of new plants, and created shelters suited to each climate. This flexibility, rooted in cooperation and imagination, was what set Homo sapiens apart. Where other species faded, ours continued to spread. There is a certain poetry in these migrations. Every footprint in soft earth was a declaration. Here we are, and we can go further. Every fire lit in a strange land was both survival and belonging. The journey out of Africa was not just a movement of bodies, but a movement of culture, carrying stories, knowledge, and traditions into entirely new worlds. Archaeological traces help us imagine these moments. Shell beads found far from coasts show networks of exchange. Tools made from local stone reveal adaptation to new materials. Cave paintings in Europe, some of the oldest art known, speak of humans settling into landscapes once unfamiliar. Each artifact is a reminder that migration was never just about necessity. It was also about identity, about creating meaning in new places. To leave Africa was to take the first steps toward becoming a global species. Our kind became walkers of deserts, sailors of oceans, dwellers of mountains, and hunters of frozen plains. In the movement outward, Homo sapiens revealed its greatest strength: to adapt, to imagine, and to endure wherever the path might lead. From here, the story of humanity begins to weave with the lives of our cousins. In distant valleys and caves, Neanderthals and Denisovans awaited. The next encounters would not only test survival, they would shape who we are even today. When Homo sapiens moved into new lands, they did not find empty worlds. Other humans were already there. In Europe and Western Asia lived the Neanderthals, strong and broad, with bodies built for cold. In the mountains of Siberia, Denisovans left traces in a cave, their identity revealed only much later through DNA. In Asia, descendants of Homo erectus still lingered, and on islands, small-bodied species like Homo floresiensis carried their own traditions. Our story has always been entangled with theirs. For a long time, scholars imagined these meetings as battles, our ancestors driving others to extinction. The truth is more complex. Evidence of interbreeding is written into our genes. Most people today carry fragments of Neanderthal DNA, and some carry Denisovan DNA as well. These are not faint traces of conquest, but the legacy of unions, encounters where lives mingled. Other times, competition surely played a role, as groups sought food, shelter, and safety in overlapping territories. Archaeology shows surprising parallels. Neanderthals made tools with skill, crafted adhesives from tree resins, hunted cooperatively, and buried their dead. In some caves, pigments and ornaments suggest symbolic thought, not unlike our own. Denisovans, though less understood, left genetic clues that suggest they contributed adaptations, such as helping modern Tibetans live at high altitudes. These cousins were not primitive shadows, but intelligent beings, shaped by different histories. The encounters between Homo sapiens and other humans were likely varied. Some moments were hostile, others intimate, and many more mundane. Groups may have avoided one another, met only rarely, or traded goods and knowledge. What is clear is that our species did not rise alone. We are a composite, carrying echoes of those we met along the way. There is reflection in this truth. To know that our identity is mixed is to see ourselves not as isolated but as connected. Every handshake, every word spoken today carries within it remnants of voices long silent. Our family tree is not a straight trunk but a braided river, branches splitting, merging, and flowing on. The loss of our cousins is a mystery still debated. Climate change, competition, and small population sizes may all have played roles. Whatever the causes, by 30,000 years ago, Homo sapiens were the only humans left. Yet even in their absence, Neanderthals and Denisovans live on inside us. In every breath, every heartbeat, their legacy is present. Imagine, for a moment, two groups meeting at the edge of a valley. Their languages are different, their tools shaped in slightly different ways. They regard each other with caution, perhaps curiosity. For an instant, the entire human story hangs between them. Whether they fought, traded, or shared a meal, we cannot know. What we do know is that from such encounters, our species was shaped. Meeting our cousins was not the end of their story, nor only the beginning of ours. It was a shared chapter, one that reminds us that humanity has never been singular. We are not the last because we were destined to be, but because chance, circumstance, and endurance carried us forward. The traces of our cousins remain, not only in fossils and caves, but in our very blood. Hunting shaped the lives of early Homo sapiens in ways both practical and profound. Survival depended on food, and food often meant large, dangerous animals. To succeed against such creatures, strength alone was never enough. What mattered was strategy, cooperation, and endurance. These qualities left their mark not only on the body, but also on the mind and on the bonds that held groups together. Unlike swift predators, humans excelled at persistence. With upright posture and sweat glands that cooled the body, they could follow animals across long distances under the heat of the Sunday. Where other hunters tired, humans kept moving, tracking prints, listening for subtle sounds, reading signs in broken grass and disturbed soil. This endurance hunting turned patience into a weapon, allowing groups to bring down prey far stronger than themselves. Hunting also demanded planning. Spears and points had to be shaped in advance, strategies agreed upon, and signals understood. Some would drive animals into narrow spaces, others would wait in ambush. The success of the hunt depended on timing and trust. Such coordination relied on communication, an early theater where language proved its value. Words, gestures, and shared understanding transformed scattered individuals into a single, functioning team. Archaeological sites preserve the echoes of these hunts. Piles of bones show selective targeting of species. Cut marks reveal systematic butchery, and hearths nearby suggest that food was not only gathered but shared. These remains tell of more than survival. They show communities gathering to prepare, to divide, to eat, and to celebrate together. In this sharing, social ties deepened, and the foundations of culture grew stronger. The hunt also sparked creativity. Fire-hardened wooden spears, stone was shaped into points, and later, bows and arrows extended reach even further. Each invention required imagination, foresight, and teaching. Children learned by watching and practicing, passing down skills that would endure across generations. In this way, the hunt became both necessity and tradition. There is reflection to be found in this chapter of our story. The hunt was not only about animals pursued, but about humans becoming more than solitary beings. It was about rhythm, footsteps stretching over plains, hearts beating in unison, voices raised in urgent calls. It was about memory, knowing which paths herds followed, and when seasons would change. It was about foresight, holding in the mind an image of success before it was real. Consider the scene. A group moves across an open landscape, the air sharp with dust, their tools ready in hand. Hours pass, then days. The animal slows, and together the group closes in, each person playing a part. When at last the prey falls, it is not victory for one but for all. In that moment, survival is shared, and the bonds of cooperation grow stronger still. The great hunt was more than a way to eat. It was a school for endurance, a forge for language, a canvas for invention, and a test of unity. Through it, Homo sapiens shaped not only the world around them but also themselves, laying the groundwork for the societies yet to come. When the day's work was done and fires burned low, early humans lay beneath the open sky. Without walls or ceilings to block the view, the night stretched endlessly overhead, a dome filled with stars. The same constellations that shine today were visible then, though brighter without the haze of modern light. Around the warmth of a hearth, or under simple shelters, people rested, gazed upward, and let stories rise with the embers. The night was not empty. Sounds of insects, the distant calls of animals, and the crackle of wood filled the darkness. These layers of sound blended with the sight of shifting constellations, the glow of the moon, and the slow drift of planets. For our ancestors, the sky was a map, a clock, and a mystery. They learned to read its patterns, the return of certain stars marking seasons, the phases of the moon guiding tides and migrations. This knowledge guided survival, but it also stirred imagination. It is here, around the fire and under the stars, that storytelling blossomed. Voices carried memories of the day, warnings about dangers, lessons about plants and animals, and tales of origins. Myths and symbols may have begun in these quiet hours, born of both need and wonder. The circle of listeners became the first classroom, where knowledge was passed without books or writing, carried instead by voice and memory. There is a gentle rhythm in these scenes. The crack of fire, the hush of night, the slow turning of stars created a space for reflection. Daily struggles faded, replaced by questions larger than survival. Where did we come from? What lies beyond? Why do the stars move as they do? These were not scientific questions yet, but they were seeds of curiosity that would one day grow into astronomy, philosophy, and art. Archaeological evidence of ochre markings, beads, and early carvings suggests that symbolic thinking was already alive. Objects carried meaning beyond their practical use, just as stories carried lessons beyond the immediate. Around the fire, humans became not only hunters and gatherers, but dreamers and thinkers. This chapter also offers a pause for you as a listener. Just as they lay beneath the stars, you too may rest under your own ceiling of night. The story continues whether your eyes are open or closed. It does not matter if sleep comes now or later. What matters is the gentle drift into calm, carried on the quiet current of human history. To sleep beneath the stars was to belong to both earth and sky. Our ancestors found safety in fire, meaning in stories, and wonder in the lights above. In their gazes upward, the seeds of science and spirituality alike were planted. And in their gatherings, humanity found a new kind of home, not only in caves or shelters, but in shared memory, spoken under the vast, eternal night. As groups of Homo sapiens spread across varied landscapes, the need for reliable shelter grew stronger. Caves offered natural refuge, cool in the heat of summer, warm against winter winds. But humans were not limited to what nature provided. They began to build. With branches, hides, and stone, they created places of safety, spaces where families could gather, where fires could burn without fear of rain, and where belongings could be stored. The earliest shelters were likely simple. Poles leaned together, covered with grass or hides, forming huts that could be built quickly and left behind when groups moved on. Archaeological remains show circles of stones that once anchored such structures, hints of post holes pressed into ancient soil, and scatters of tools and ash that mark the lives lived inside. These were not grand constructions, but they changed the rhythm of existence. A shelter turned wilderness into home. With shelters came new ways of living. Fires could burn longer, protected from wind. Food could be stored, kept safe from animals. Children could sleep in warmth, guarded from rain and snow. The shelter was more than wood and stone. It was a boundary between chaos and order, danger and safety. Within its walls, humans found the first sense of privacy, the first space that was theirs alone. Symbolically, these early homes were extensions of the body. Just as fur had once protected ancestors, walls now wrapped around groups, shielding them. They were also extensions of community, physical expressions of cooperation. No single person could easily build alone, but together, families raised walls and created shared places. This act of construction reflected something deeper, the ability to reshape the environment to fit human needs. Shelters also became the backdrop for new forms of connection. Inside, groups gathered at night to eat, to tell stories, to plan the next day. Objects began to accumulate. Tools left in corners, ornaments strung from branches, pigments stored in stone bowls. These signs suggest that shelters were not only practical but also cultural spaces, places where identity and belonging took root. Over time, as groups settled for longer, shelters grew more complex. Mammoth bones were stacked into frameworks, covered with hides. Larger huts appeared, capable of housing more people together. These were early steps toward villages, though that transition still lay far in the future. Even in their simplest form, shelters marked a new chapter. Humans were not only responding to their environment, they were altering it. Consider the significance. To build a shelter is to imagine a space before it exists, to plan, to gather materials, to create. It is invention applied to daily life. It is also permanence, however brief, a statement that here, for a time, we belong. The first shelters did not last, their wood and hide long gone, yet the impressions they left remain, faint but clear enough to tell us that humanity had crossed a threshold. No longer entirely at the mercy of wind and weather, people carried with them the knowledge of how to make a home wherever they went. From that knowledge grew villages, cities, and the architecture of the world we live in today. Deep inside caves where sunlight never reached, early humans left marks that still endure. On walls of limestone and sandstone they painted with ochre, charcoal, and ground minerals, creating shapes of animals, handprints, and abstract symbols. These works, some more than 30,000 years old, are among the earliest evidence of art, a sign that humanity was beginning to express not just survival, but imagination. The subjects were often animals, bison, horses, mammoths, reindeer, drawn with striking detail. Some were outlined in bold lines, others shaded to suggest movement. The walls of Lascaux in France and Altamira in Spain show not only depictions of creatures but compositions that seem deliberate, almost theatrical, with animals layered as if in motion. Hand stencils, created by blowing pigment over an outstretched palm, declared presence. Someone was here, someone wanted to be remembered. Why did they do this? The practical need is unclear. Art did not feed or shelter, yet it must have served a purpose. Some theories suggest these images were part of rituals, linked to hunting or belief. Others see them as teaching tools, passing knowledge of animals to younger generations. Still others propose that they were simply expressions of creativity, the joy of leaving a mark. Whatever the reason, they reveal minds capable of abstraction, of turning the seen world into symbol. Art was not limited to caves. Beads carved from shells and bones were strung together. Pigments were ground and carried. Figurines were shaped from stone and ivory. These objects carried meaning beyond function, signaling identity, status, or belonging. The famous Venus figurines, with exaggerated human forms, suggest symbolic or spiritual roles, reflecting early ideas about life, fertility, or community. What makes these creations remarkable is not only their age but their humanity. They tell us that early Homo Sapiens saw the world in layers, not only as a place of resources and dangers, but as a place of beauty, story, and memory. In painting an animal on stone, they were not capturing prey, but capturing an idea. That leap into symbolism marks a profound step in the evolution of the mind. There is something moving about these works surviving in silence for so long. The artists never knew their audience would live tens of thousands of years later, yet their lines and colors reach across time. To look at them is to feel a connection, fragile but real, with people who lived lives vastly different yet recognizably human. Art on stone was more than decoration. It was a declaration that the human mind could imagine, could symbolize, could create meaning beyond necessity. These painted caves and carved beads were the first museums, the first libraries, the first whispers of culture that would expand into the vast tapestry of human expression. From these beginnings, the story of creativity unfolds. In the next steps of our journey, we will see how humans began to shape not only images but relationships with other species, forming bonds that would forever change the path of survival and culture alike. At the edges of human camps, where firelight met darkness, animals watched. Some came as threats, others as scavengers, drawn by scraps of meat and bone. Over time, one of these relationships shifted. Wolves, curious and cautious, lingered near people, and people tolerated their presence. From this slow dance of approach and retreat came the first taming of animals, a partnership that would shape both species forever. The earliest evidence of domesticated dogs stretches back more than 15,000 years, though the process likely began long before. Certain wolves, less aggressive and more willing to scavenge near humans, gained an advantage. Humans, in turn, gained early warning of predators, help in hunting, and companionship. Over generations, through both natural selection and human choice, these wolves became something new: dogs. Their loyalty and adaptability made them the first domesticated animals, and they remain our closest companions even today. Domestication did not end with dogs. Goats, sheep, and cattle followed, offering milk, meat, and hides. Horses became partners in travel and war. Cats, drawn to stores of grain that attracted mice, joined human settlements and carved a niche as guardians against pests. Each domestication was a negotiation, a blending of wildness with cooperation. The animals changed, but so did humans, adapting lives, diets, and cultures around their new companions. The taming of animals was more than survival. It reflected foresight, the ability to imagine not only what was, but what could be. To look at a wolf and see a future ally, to look at a wild goat and see a source of steady food, required a leap of vision. It was another form of invention, not with stone or fire, but with living beings. These bonds reveal the essence of humanity's relationship with the natural world. We were no longer only shaped by our environment, we were shaping it in return. The animals that once lived apart now lived alongside, their fates entwined with ours. In caring for them, training them, and relying on them, humans extended their sense of community beyond their own species. Archaeological discoveries give us glimpses of this connection. Burials where humans and dogs lie together suggest bonds deeper than utility. Paintings on cave walls show animals not only as prey but as companions. The shift from wild to tame marked the beginning of a new chapter in human culture, one where cooperation expanded across species. Consider the significance. Every farm, every herd, every faithful companion by a hearth traces back to those first tentative steps at the edge of the firelight. From curiosity and trust, a partnership grew that transformed survival and culture alike. The taming of animals was one of humanity's earliest experiments in shaping the living world. From it came not only food and labor, but also connection and meaning. This step carried us closer to settled life, to villages and farms, and to a new way of existing that would soon change the course of human history. The turning point from wandering to settling began with seeds. For countless generations, humans lived as hunters and gatherers, following herds, gathering fruits, roots, and grains as they appeared with the seasons. Then, slowly and unevenly, some groups began to do something different. They planted, they tended, they harvested from the same place year after year. This shift from foraging to farming reshaped not only the landscape but the very structure of human life. Archaeological evidence places some of the earliest farming in the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East, about 12,000 years ago. Here, wild wheat and barley grew in abundance, and people learned to collect the grains, grind them, and plant them deliberately. In other regions, rice was cultivated along the rivers of China, maize in the Americas, yams and sorghum in Africa. Farming was not a single invention but a series of discoveries, repeated in many places, each adapted to local plants and conditions. With farming came profound consequences. Food supplies grew more reliable, allowing larger groups to live together. Villages formed, no longer tied to constant movement. Populations expanded, children could be raised with less risk of scarcity, and surpluses could be stored for lean seasons. These changes also introduced new challenges. Work became harder, diets less varied, and disease spread more easily in close quarters. Yet despite the difficulties, farming spread, carried by necessity and by the promise of stability. The domestication of plants went hand in hand with the domestication of animals. Herds of sheep, goats, and cattle grazed alongside fields, providing milk, meat, and labor. Together, agriculture and animal husbandry transformed landscapes. Forests were cleared, soils tilled, rivers managed. Humanity became a force of change on a scale never seen before. Therefore, farming was a declaration of intent. To place a seed in the ground is to believe in tomorrow. It is an act of patience and trust, a quiet contract between people and the earth. Each harvest reinforced the lesson. Through care and planning, the future could be shaped, not merely endured. Archaeological sites preserve the traces of this transformation. Grinding stones worn smooth by repeated use, clay storage jars lined against walls, post holes marking permanent structures. In these remnants, we see the beginning of settled life, the roots of civilization. The seeds of farming also planted new social patterns. Surpluses allowed trade, specialization of labor, and the rise of leadership. Inequalities emerged, as some controlled more resources than others. The first hierarchies, the first written records, the first cities, all trace back to the moment when humans decided to shape their food instead of only gathering it. From the patient tending of fields, humanity entered a new age. The nomadic trails of the past gave way to pathways of irrigation, fields, and villages. In this change, the rhythm of life shifted forever, and the foundation for culture, science, and society was laid. With farming, part 2 of our journey draws to a close. Humanity had become not only a species that survived, but one that reshaped its world. In the chapters ahead, we will see how these seeds grew into villages, cities, and the first great networks of culture and meaning. When humans first planted seeds and raised animals, the ground itself invited them to stay. From this stability, villages emerged. Small clusters of homes, built of mud, wood, or stone, grew around fields and water sources. These villages were more than shelters grouped together. They were the first true communities, places where life took on a rhythm beyond the daily chase of food and flight from danger. Inside a village, voices multiplied. Conversations no longer belonged only to the hunt or the gathering of plants. People spoke while grinding grain, while weaving baskets, while tending fires. Knowledge that once scattered with wandering groups now pooled in one place, accumulating. Stories were retold, tools refined, and traditions shaped. The village became a vessel for memory, a living archive of skills and beliefs. Archaeological sites such as Çatalhöyük in modern-day Turkey reveal houses pressed tightly together, their roofs used as streets, their walls painted with murals of hunts and rituals. Burials beneath floors hint at families who lived and died in the same space for generations. Such evidence shows that villages were not only practical but symbolic. They anchored identity. To belong to a village was to belong to something larger than oneself. Villages also required new forms of cooperation. Irrigation channels needed digging, harvests needed storing, disputes needed settling. Leadership emerged, not in the form of kings yet, but as elders, respected voices, or skilled individuals whose decisions guided others. The act of living together demanded compromise, trust, and rules. From this, the seeds of governance and law began to grow. The concentration of people brought new challenges. Waste and disease spread more easily, and disputes could escalate when neighbors lived so close. Yet these difficulties were balanced by the strength of community. A harvest lost by one family could be helped by another. Knowledge of herbs or hunting paths could be shared. Children grew in an environment where learning came not only from parents but from the collective. There is a symbolic weight to the first villages. They represent the moment when humans truly began to settle into time, creating continuity that stretched across generations. A village was a promise to the future. Here we will plant again. Here we will raise our children. Here we will bury our dead and tell our stories. Picture a morning in such a place. Smoke rises from low roofs, voices call across narrow lanes, animals stir in pens, and fields glimmer with dew. Each small action, grinding, weaving, carrying water, is ordinary, yet together they weave the first fabric of society. The village is both fragile and enduring, held together by voices that never fall silent. From these beginnings, humanity would take its next steps. Villages grew into towns, and towns into cities. Trade expanded, architecture rose, and culture deepened. The voices of the first villages still echo in us, for in their gatherings, we can see the roots of the world we live in today. As villages grew and multiplied, some swelled beyond their modest beginnings. People gathered in greater numbers, food surpluses supported larger populations, and specialized roles emerged. From these changes rose the first cities, places unlike anything humanity had known before. Cities were not simply bigger villages, they were centers of innovation, culture, and power that reshaped the human experience. The earliest cities appeared in Mesopotamia, along the fertile plains of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Settlements like Uruk expanded into sprawling centers, with temples, markets, and walls enclosing thousands of people. In the Indus Valley, Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa rose with carefully planned streets and drainage systems, evidence of order and foresight. In Mesoamerica and China, other centers flourished independently, each with its own style of architecture, governance, and belief. Across the world, the idea of the city emerged wherever farming and trade allowed human groups to concentrate and cooperate. In cities, labor divided further. Farmers supported artisans, who shaped clay into pottery, metal into tools, and stone into ornaments. Merchants exchanged goods near and far, weaving webs of trade that connected distant lands. Priests, leaders, and administrators kept records, collected resources, and directed collective efforts. With so many voices, the city became a crucible of human diversity, where new ideas spread quickly and traditions met strangers' customs. Architecture marked the ambition of cities. Monumental temples, ziggurats, and pyramids rose above ordinary houses, symbols of collective effort and spiritual devotion. Public spaces emerged, where markets buzzed, rituals unfolded, and laws were declared. In the city, humanity learned to live not only as families or villages, but as societies composed of thousands, bound by shared symbols and structures. Yet life in cities was not without cost. Crowding brought disease, inequality grew as wealth concentrated, and conflicts became sharper. Walls were built not only to enclose but to defend. Still, the benefits of concentrated knowledge and trade outweighed the dangers for many. The city was both a promise and a challenge, a place of opportunity and tension. There is a symbolism in this step. Cities represent humanity's ability to create order out of complexity, to turn scattered individuals into organized communities. They also embody ambition, to build bigger, to gather more, to endure across generations. Each city was a statement. Here we shape not only homes but entire worlds of culture, faith, and power. Archaeological traces of the first cities reveal streets worn smooth by countless feet, walls rebuilt again and again, and artifacts from faraway lands, proof of networks that stretched across continents. In their ruins, we see both the fragility and endurance of human creation. The rise of cities marked the beginning of civilization as we know it. From these crowded, dynamic centers came writing, trade networks, organized religion, and eventually empires. With the first cities, humanity stepped into a new scale of existence, one where the actions of thousands wove together into a single, unfolding story. The invention of writing was one of the most transformative moments in human history. For countless generations, memory had lived only in voices, passed from one person to another through stories, songs, and lessons. Words vanished as soon as they were spoken, surviving only if they were remembered. With writing, memory could be fixed outside the mind, etched into clay, carved in stone, brushed onto papyrus. For the first time, knowledge could endure beyond the life of a speaker, beyond the reach of immediate memory. The earliest writing systems emerged in different places, each shaped by local needs. In Mesopotamia, cuneiform impressed into clay tablets recorded trade, taxes, and laws. In Egypt, hieroglyphs carried both sacred meaning and practical record-keeping. In China, early characters were inscribed on bones used for divination. In Mesoamerica, Mayan glyphs told histories and rituals. Though their forms differed, the impulse was the same: to make thought permanent. Writing changed not only how humans remembered but how they organized. Laws written down became binding across generations. Accounts of trade allowed long-distance networks to flourish. Stories carved into stone gave rulers legitimacy and connected people to shared myths. Writing was a tool of power, a means of governance, and a vessel for culture. It also reshaped the mind. When knowledge no longer depended only on memory, people could think differently, building on what was stored outside themselves. Complex ideas could be recorded, revised, and expanded. Philosophy, science, and literature became possible because thoughts could be captured, returned to, and argued with across centuries. Archaeologists uncover tablets that detail everyday life: shipments of grain, lists of workers, contracts for land. These fragments, though mundane, are windows into lives once lived, their concerns not so different from our own. Alongside them are texts of epic scale, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, where myth and memory combine to ask questions about mortality and meaning. Writing thus spanned both the ordinary and the eternal. There is symbolism in this act of inscription. To carve lines into stone or to press symbols into clay is to reach forward in time, to speak not only to one's peers but to strangers yet unborn. Writing was humanity's first technology of immortality, allowing voices to outlast their bodies. Think of the continuity this created. A farmer records a harvest, a scribe copies a law, a poet sets down a verse. Millennia later, those marks are still legible, still carrying meaning. Writing turned the present into the past, and the past into something retrievable. With writing, the human story grew richer. Villages and cities were no longer only places of trade and worship, but archives of thought. From inscriptions on temple walls to letters carried along roads, writing bound societies together with shared memory. It remains with us still, the quiet thread linking our present voices to the earliest marks pressed into clay. Long before telescopes or mathematics, humans looked upward and found meaning in the sky. The stars wheeled overhead in patterns that repeated with the seasons. The sun rose and fell in predictable arcs, and the moon waxed and waned with quiet rhythm. To early societies, these celestial movements were not only natural phenomena but signs, stories, and guides. From them grew calendars, rituals, and beliefs that tied the human world to the heavens above. In Mesopotamia, priests watched the sky from temple towers, recording the movements of planets and stars on clay tablets. These observations were practical, predicting floods, guiding planting and harvest, but they were also sacred. The heavens were seen as a realm of gods, their motions messages that shaped the fate of kings and cities. In Egypt, the rising of Sirius each year marked the flooding of the Nile, linking the rhythms of agriculture to the stars. Across the world, from China to Mesoamerica, similar practices took shape, each culture weaving its beliefs into the movements of the sky. Constellations became a kind of map of memory. Hunters, heroes, and animals were drawn into the night sky, their stories told and retold around fires and in temples. These star myths carried lessons, preserved history, and reinforced cultural identity. To know the constellations was to know both the cosmos and the self. Astronomy and belief were not separate in these early times. The sky was both a source of data and a canvas for imagination. Observing the heavens allowed people to predict seasons, yet the same observations inspired stories of gods and creation. In this blend of science and spirituality, we see the human impulse to understand, to connect, to find order in vastness. Archaeological evidence shows how deeply the stars shaped culture. Stone circles like Stonehenge in Britain or Nabta Playa in Egypt align with solstices and star risings. Temples in Mesoamerica are oriented to celestial events, their staircases catching sunlight on specific days. These structures are not only monuments of stone but monuments of time, anchoring human life to the rhythms of the cosmos. There is reflection here on the human need for connection. To look at the stars is to see both distance and belonging. The light of a star, traveling for centuries before reaching the eye, links us to a cosmic story larger than ourselves. Yet in arranging those stars into constellations, humans made the vast intimate, turning infinite points into familiar figures. Consider a night in the first cities. Farmers, priests, children, and travelers all gaze at the same sky. One sees the promise of planting, another the will of gods, another a story retold. In that shared sky, belief and knowledge merge, binding communities together under the same heavens. The stars offered guidance, wonder, and a sense of place in the universe. They taught humanity to measure time, to dream of order, and to see meaning beyond the immediate. From these early connections to the sky grew the seeds of both astronomy and philosophy, disciplines that would later diverge but always remain rooted in the same act, lifting the eyes upward and asking what it all means. As cities grew and societies flourished, threads of exchange began to stretch across vast distances. Goods moved from one region to another, carrying not only materials but also ideas, languages, and beliefs. These networks of trade were the first global connectors, weaving together people who had never met, linking distant landscapes into a shared web of human experience. Some of the earliest trade followed rivers. Boats carried grain, stone, and clay along the Nile, the Tigris, and the Euphrates. Later, caravans crossed deserts, loaded with salt, spices, and textiles. On the seas, merchants guided ships along coastlines, exchanging copper for tin, lapis for shells, obsidian for pottery. Each journey carried risks, but also rewards, as communities gained goods that could not be found at home. The Silk Road became one of the most famous of these networks. Stretching from China to the Mediterranean, it carried silk, porcelain, spices, glass, and precious metals. Yet it was more than trade in objects. Ideas traveled along the same paths. Buddhism spread eastward, while mathematics and astronomy moved westward. Traders, monks, and scholars became conduits of culture, their journeys shaping civilizations. Trade also reshaped societies. Surpluses from farming allowed some people to specialize as artisans, producing tools, jewelry, or textiles that could be exchanged. Markets grew, where strangers could bargain and bond. Coins and standardized weights emerged, creating trust in transactions between people who shared no language. These systems bound diverse communities into shared economic rhythms. Archaeology uncovers the footprints of these exchanges. Beads from distant lands appear in burials, metals from faraway mines in tools, designs borrowed from one culture carved into another's pottery. These scattered traces reveal a web of contact that spanned continents long before modern globalization. Trade represents connection. To give and receive is to acknowledge dependence, to admit that no community is entirely self-sufficient. In exchange lies recognition of value, trust, and relationship. Trade routes were not only paths for goods but also for stories, beliefs, and technologies, threads binding humanity together across distance. Picture a caravan cresting a desert ridge at sunset, or a ship docking at a foreign port, its cargo unloaded into eager hands. The goods exchanged are tangible, but what lingers is intangible. New tastes, new words, new ways of seeing. Trade was not only about wealth but about curiosity and adaptation. The networks of trade marked a new scale of human interaction. No longer confined to villages or cities, societies became part of regional and even intercontinental webs. In these exchanges, humanity discovered both its diversity and its unity. The marketplace became a mirror of civilization, reflecting the shared desire to connect, to create, and to carry meaning across the spaces that separated us. As the first civilizations matured, the rhythms of daily life grew more structured. Work filled the daylight hours, and with cities came noise, obligations, and endless activity. Yet night remained a time of pause, a boundary between labor and renewal. In this space, sleep took on a new dimension. No longer just a biological necessity, it became woven into culture, shaped by architecture, ritual, and belief. In early cities, people no longer slept beneath open skies. They rested within walls of mud, brick, or stone, in homes pressed close to one another, their dreams contained within new boundaries. Archaeological evidence of beds built from reeds or wood shows that sleep was no longer improvised, but prepared for. The hearth glowed nearby, a quiet guardian against darkness, while families gathered in the same room, their breathing and shifting forming a communal rhythm. Sleep was also influenced by cycles of light. Oil lamps and torches extended the day, but they could not erase the power of darkness. People often slept in segments, an early sleep after sunset, awaking in the middle of the night for prayer, reflection, or quiet talk, and then a second sleep until dawn. This pattern, found in many traditions, reflects how human rest adapted to the world before artificial light. Belief added another layer. Dreams were seen as messages, glimpses of the divine, or visions of the future. In Mesopotamia, priests interpreted dreams for kings, recording them on clay tablets. In Egypt, dream books listed omens and meanings. Sleep was not only rest, but a journey into realms where gods, spirits, and ancestors could speak. There is a symbolic resonance here. In the bustle of civilization, sleep remained a reminder that humans were still bound to nature, to cycles of night and day, to the vulnerability of the body. No wall, no city gate, no army could replace the need to close one's eyes and surrender to rest. In this act, rich and poor alike were equal, sharing in the same fragile rhythm. Consider a scene from an ancient city. The day's noise has faded, fires burn low, and narrow streets lie silent under starlight. Behind walls, families lie close together, drifting into sleep. Some dream of harvests, some of journeys, some of gods. In their stillness, the city itself seems to breathe, its pulse slowing until dawn returns. For you, listening now, this reminder is gentle. If sleep comes, let it carry you as it carried them, across the gulf of centuries, linking your body's rhythm to theirs. And if sleep waits a little longer, that is no burden. The story continues, and with it, the quiet assurance that rest belongs to all of us, part of the long history of being human. Sleep and civilization reveal that even as humanity built cities and systems, we remained creatures of cycles. Rest bound us to one another and to the turning earth, a shared rhythm that endures across time. As villages became cities and cities connected through trade, power gathered in new forms. Empires rose, vast networks of people and lands brought under single rule. To govern such scale, humanity turned to laws, codes written and enforced to hold diverse communities together. These empires and their laws shaped not only politics, but the very ways people thought about order, justice, and belonging. One of the earliest known law codes is the Code of Hammurabi, carved into stone in Mesopotamia around 1750 BCE. Its laws covered property, contracts, marriage, crime, and punishment, etched so all could see. Though not equal in fairness, the code carried a new idea: that order could be maintained through rules, not only through the will of rulers. Egypt, too, relied on laws tied to the concept of ma'at, truth, balance, and cosmic order, while in ancient China, systems of governance blended law with philosophy, drawing on Confucian and legalist traditions. Empires stretched across continents. The Persian Empire built roads and postal systems to unify lands from India to Greece. Rome developed legal traditions that still echo in courts today, alongside aqueducts and infrastructure that held provinces together. In India, the Mauryan Empire spread administration and law across vast territories, guided by edicts carved in stone. Each empire found its own balance of strength and persuasion, of armies and agreements. The creation of laws did more than control behavior. It shaped identity. People came to see themselves as citizens, subjects, or members of a wider community. Laws formalized rights and responsibilities, weaving individuals into the fabric of the state. Even when unequal or harsh, they offered predictability, a sense that life was governed by patterns larger than any one person. Archaeological and historical records preserve these systems: tablets with judgments, inscriptions proclaiming decrees, records of taxes and censuses. These remnants reveal how deeply law entered daily life, from land ownership to trade, from family matters to disputes settled in courts. As a symbol, laws represent humanity's attempt to mirror cosmic order on Earth. Just as the stars followed cycles and seasons, so too did rulers seek to create order from human complexity. An empire without laws would collapse under its own weight. With laws, it could endure beyond the lives of its leaders. Think of a crowded marketplace in an ancient city. Traders from distant lands haggle over goods. Coins pass from hand to hand. Disputes flare and are resolved not by force, but by agreed rules. Behind the bustle lies the quiet framework of law, invisible but binding, allowing strangers to trust one another enough to trade and live together. Empires and laws were humanity's experiments in scale. They revealed both ambition and fragility, showing how far cooperation could stretch and how easily it could fracture. Their legacy is still with us, in the systems of justice, governance, and order that shape our world today. In every civilization, curiosity stirred. People looked at the world and asked why rivers rose and fell, why the sun crossed the sky, why illness struck, why metals could be shaped, why stars seemed to wander among fixed constellations. From these questions grew the beginnings of science, though it did not yet bear that name. Observation, experiment, and reasoning slowly emerged, carried by thinkers who sought patterns in nature and logic in the unknown. In Mesopotamia, careful records of the heavens became the foundation of early astronomy. In Egypt, knowledge of geometry guided the building of pyramids and temples. In India, scholars developed systems of mathematics that shaped later traditions, while in China, observations of medicine, magnetism, and engineering flourished. Across the Mediterranean, Greek philosophers asked questions not only about how but about why, weaving natural philosophy into the first frameworks of scientific thought. Some discoveries were practical: the measurement of land, the calculation of time, the mapping of stars. Others were speculative, attempts to describe the hidden principles of matter or the nature of life itself. Many ideas proved incomplete or mistaken, yet even errors carried forward the habit of questioning. Each observation added to a growing archive of knowledge that could be tested, challenged, and refined. The spirit of science was also tied to technology. Metallurgy advanced, shaping stronger tools and weapons. Medicine moved from charms to herbal remedies and early surgery. Water systems carried rivers into fields, while ships learned to harness the winds. In each of these steps, experience and imagination worked together, drawing humanity further from instinct and closer to systematic understanding. What distinguished these beginnings was continuity. Oral traditions had preserved knowledge, but writing allowed discoveries to accumulate. A calculation scratched into clay or a diagram drawn on papyrus could be studied by others long after its author was gone. Knowledge was no longer fleeting. It became a lineage of thought, passed hand to hand across centuries. This moment carries echoes of this awakening. Science represents humanity's attempt to peel back mystery without abandoning wonder. To measure a star's path is not to diminish it, but to deepen connection. To understand illness is not to strip it of meaning, but to bring healing within reach. The roots of science grew from awe as much as from reason, from the same impulse that painted animals on stone or traced constellations in the sky. Picture a scholar by lamplight, scratching symbols onto a tablet, or an elder teaching apprentices to mix herbs by moonlight. In their hands, knowledge takes shape, fragile yet enduring. Each question asked becomes a doorway to another, and slowly, the foundations of science are laid. The awakening of science did not replace myth or belief, but joined them, offering another way to see the world. From these first steps, humanity gained tools not only to survive but to understand, to reach beyond fear and into discovery. This search for patterns and causes would grow into one of the defining forces of our species, shaping the centuries that followed. As science began to stir, so too did philosophy. Humans were not content only to measure stars or heal the sick. They sought to understand meaning, justice, beauty, and truth. Horizons of thought expanded, carried by voices that questioned not just how the world worked, but how people should live within it. In ancient India, the Vedas and Upanishads explored the nature of existence and consciousness, planting seeds of philosophy and spirituality that still influence the world today. In China, Confucius taught of order, harmony, and ethics, while Laozi spoke of the Tao, the way that flows through all things. In Greece, thinkers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle debated reason, virtue, and the structure of knowledge, laying foundations for Western philosophy and science alike. These traditions differed in form and focus, yet they shared an impulse to step beyond survival and ask deeper questions. What is justice? What is the self? What is the nature of reality? Such questions had no simple answers, yet by asking them, humans expanded the boundaries of thought, creating traditions of inquiry that reached across generations. Philosophy also shaped societies. Laws and governments drew on ideas of order and fairness. Religions absorbed and reflected philosophical principles. Education grew, not only as training for skills but as cultivation of the mind. In every case, the act of questioning reshaped how communities understood themselves and their place in the cosmos. Writing allowed these ideas to travel. Scrolls, tablets, and oral teachings carried philosophies far from their points of origin. Along trade routes, texts were translated, debated, and reimagined. The horizon of thought was not bounded by geography. It spread wherever people listened and reflected. This chapter reminds us that in this stage of our journey, to think about thought itself is to turn the mind inward, to make reflection both tool and subject. Philosophy is humanity's mirror, showing not only what we know, but how we know, not only what we believe, but why we believe it. Envision a gathering under colonnades in Athens, or a quiet grove in India, or a shaded hall in China. Students sit with teachers, questions rise and answers unfold, not as fixed truths but as paths to further inquiry. In these spaces, the seeds of wisdom are planted, seeds that still grow in the world today. The horizons of thought stretched far beyond what those early thinkers could imagine. Yet their courage to ask shaped the arc of human history, reminding us that knowledge is not only about survival but about meaning, not only about the external world but the inner one as well. As we near the close of this journey, we turn from these questions of thought to the broader story of humanity itself, its origins, its legacy, and its place in the vast fabric of time. From the beginning of this journey, we have followed the long path of humanity, from the restless chemistry of the early Earth to the rise of civilizations, from sparks of fire to sparks of thought. Each chapter has traced a step in the unfolding story of Homo Sapiens, where we come from, how we have changed, and what it means to belong to this lineage of life. The story of humanity is not a straight road, but a winding one. We have been wanderers across continents, builders of homes and cities, makers of tools and art, dreamers beneath stars, seekers of knowledge and meaning. Along the way we have carried with us the echoes of our cousins, the traces of ancestors who lived, loved, and passed before us. Their legacy flows in our blood and our memory, connecting us to a vast chain that stretches back millions of years. What makes us human is not only our bodies or our tools, but our imagination, our capacity to wonder, to connect, to create. We are the species that paints on stone, that tells stories around fires, that looks at the night sky and asks questions larger than ourselves. We are shaped by survival, but also by curiosity, by compassion, and by the endless search for meaning in a universe that does not speak except through the language we give it. This story is not finished. Each of us carries it forward in small ways. in the knowledge we pass on, the care we give, the questions we ask. We are at once ancient and new, born of stardust and shaped by time, yet still writing chapters with every step we take. The future will add to this tale, just as the past has carried us here. As this chapter closes, there is comfort in remembering how deeply connected we are, to Earth, whose soil and seas made us possible, to the stars, whose light began our story long before life arose, and to each other, companions in this vast unfolding. Now, as you set this story aside, may it leave you with a sense of belonging, to time, to nature, to the shared human journey. Whether your eyes drift closed or remain awake a little longer, the story is yours to carry, gentle and enduring. We from Sleeping with Science wish you a good night.